It's a pleasure to welcome Jagannathesvari today, who is going to be speaking on the very interesting and arresting topic, at least for me, on the metaphysics of virtue. For those of you who don't know Jagannathesvari, she lives just on the outskirts of London, I believe. Mm-hmm. And she's an author. She has a background in literature. And we're all really, really interested to hear what she has to say. She has decades of experience in Krishna consciousness. So please keep a note of your questions, plug them in the chat if you worry that you forget them, and we can make sure and pick them up toward the end of the session. Jagannathesvari, over to you.
Thank you. And Hare Krishna to everyone. And welcome. My name's, well, anyway, I've already been introduced, so I will dive right in. So today I'm going to be talking about why it feels good to be nice, which is to do with the metaphysics of virtue. So this is something that we all experience. And I think a good example now, because we're in the middle of a pandemic, an outstanding example that comes to mind is all the doctors and nurses who are risking their lives to take care of people with coronavirus. Of course, it's part of their job to risk their lives, but usually the risk is very small. Now, in this situation, the risk is very big, and there are many cases of doctors and nurses who have already lost their lives in the course of their duty, taking care of their patients. So sometimes it can be like in the most challenging times that actually bring out the best in people. And this is an outstanding example of this. So why do they do that? Why do people do that? Why do people make such sacrifices for other people? Why do they risk their lives? People, they don't even know them. So that brings up the question that why does it feel good to do good? And why do we feel happiness? Why do we feel this inner satisfaction from doing good for others? Could it be because we are expecting them to do something good for us in return? That kind of calculation is an expectation or desire for future happiness. It does not produce the present experience of happiness that we're talking about here. So it couldn't be that. Could it be that we feel some kind of pride from it and we enjoy being praised? Well, that type of happiness can be enjoyed by other means also, by any personal achievement. It's something that maybe is enjoyed with the ego, but it doesn't satisfy the heart deeply. Could it be because we want people to like us? Again, this is a desire for the future rather than the real and present experience of happiness. So these kind of reasons they don't really explain that deep satisfaction that we feel in the heart when we do something really good, when we are kind to others, when we go out of our way to make other people happy, when we make sacrifices, when we forgive others, when we, anyway, all these different virtues, we're gonna discuss them. So could it be something to do with authenticity? That we're acting according to our real nature? If our inherent nature is one of goodness, then we feel happy when we act accordingly. Just like we feel happy when we engage in a favorite hobby or activity, if that is our real inherent nature. So I'm going to have a look at what some other people have said about this in the past, because this is a question that people have pondered over the ages. And so a good example is in Greek philosophy. Aristotle actually pondered this, and there's the term that he used, eudaimonia. And eudaimonia means happiness or well-being, which is connected with virtue. It's about living a life in accordance with the virtues, or which is called a good life. He called a good life. So good can mean good virtuous, or it can mean good in the sense of enjoyable. So in one sense, the good life brings both of those things together, the virtue and the enjoyment come together in a happiness. So eudaimonia is often taken to mean happiness, or sometimes it's translated as welfare, flourishing, or well-being. And for Aristotle, what constitutes the good for mankind is human life lived at its best. And he said that the exercise of virtues is a necessary and central part of such a life. And before Aristotle, there was also Socrates and Plato, who also explored these same concepts. So Plato, who was Aristotle's mentor in his most famous book, The Republic, a work on justice, he expounded these four virtues of temperance, courage, justice, and wisdom. And he believed that happiness was about living in pursuit of these virtues. Socrates also saw eudaimonia as the ultimate goal. And he believed that moral virtue was actually the cause of human happiness. So the question is, what is virtue? And where do virtues come from? So it's natural to think, could it be that virtues do not have to be acquired externally, but are already pre-programmed within everyone? It's interesting that similar human virtues can be found to be upheld in the teachings of many different cultures and religions around the world, which kind of indicates that they are an intrinsic part of what makes us human. And this is also supported by our own experience. Like, as I was saying before, as we feel good when we do good, we feel happy when we make others happy. And today we've got this kind of philosophy of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle has been revived, has actually inspired this positive psychology. It's a new school of thought in psychology, which it's been going on for about 20 years, since the turn of the century. And it's like a different approach to psychology, that instead of just addressing mental illness and psychological problems, it has a more positive emphasis, and that which is a lot to do with virtue. And so it's like a different approach to mental health by focusing on what is good in human beings and building on that rather than just trying to fix the problems. And they also use that same term, eudaimonia. And they often, the positive psychologists, they use well-being and happiness like very closely together. So the founders of positive psychology, you've got Peterson and Seligman, who came up with this book called Character, Strengths and Virtues, which is like a classification. What they did, they studied different cultures from around the world and throughout history. And they came up with the most common, popular sort of virtues and character strengths which show up in all these different cultures. So it's interesting, they come up with 6 virtues, and 4 of those are actually the same ones which I mentioned before, which is Plato's list from the Republic. Courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom or knowledge. And then they added 2 more, which are transcendence and humanity. So they've been very much influenced by the Greek philosophy and also by Eastern philosophy, by Buddhism, by Vedic teachings, and there's also like a list of character strengths which are linked with each of these virtues. So every virtue is nourished by certain character strengths. And so the idea is that by building these character strengths and building these virtues, people can find happiness. Because at the end of the day, everyone is looking for happiness. So, and they've also come up with interventions, meaning that researchers who are working in positive psychology in that field, they've been doing studies where they get a whole bunch of people together and they ask them to focus on and practice these certain type of virtues and then see what is the result in terms of their happiness and their just general well-being. Like one example is they had this gratitude diaries where people write down every day all the things that they're grateful for and then see how it makes them feel after a certain number of days, how much better it makes them feel. And they had very positive results. Some of the happiness enhancing interventions include kindness, gratitude, optimism, humility, awe, and mindfulness. So a lot of these studies have been carried out to find out how much difference these things make to people's happiness and also their mental health, their physical health, and their relationships. And they've had a lot of positive results in all these areas. Like, for example, in relationship science, which is something that I have a particular interest in. If we apply this philosophy, the Greek philosophy, that by realization of our virtue potentials, we can achieve subsequent happiness. So it really makes a big difference in relationships, because if some people, they enter relationships thinking that another person is going to make me happy, then it's not going to work out. Because if we understand that happiness comes from within, and it comes from virtue, from being a good person, then actually, if we bring that kind of concept into a relationship, then the resultant understanding is that we're going to make our own happiness. We're not going to expect somebody else to make us happy, because we have to actually bring our own happiness into the relationship. And that's the only thing that can make it work. And so there are certain morals and virtues which, by being practiced, could be said to hold the key to a happy and fulfilling relationship. And so this includes humility, kindness, gratitude, truth, honesty, faith, which includes trust and loyalty, hope, forgiveness, sacrifice, and love. Of course, love is like the most powerful one, the most important one, and it's kind of in its own category, as it's could be said to be the chief of all the virtues, but also more than just a virtue, the power of love. So according to Aristotle, we experience joy by exercising. The process of exercising is central. So even though if those virtues are inbuilt within us, but unless we actually practice and exercise them, we're not going to be able to realize our full potential and achieve subsequent happiness. So according to Aristotle, the virtues of the soul are of two sorts. One is virtue of thought, and the other is virtue of character. And he said that virtue of thought arises mostly from teaching. It has to be taught. And so it needs experience and time to learn. Whereas virtue of character is from habit. So in other words, it's from practicing, from exercising, then we develop virtue of character. So then another question we could ask is that if our inherent nature is goodness, then why do we not always behave in goodness? Why do we get sidetracked? So according to the Bhagavad-gita, there are three varieties of pervading natural energies in the world which influence our moods and activities according to which direction we choose to go. And these are known as goodness, passion, and ignorance. So happiness is considered to be a symptom of the mode of goodness. The pleasures enjoyed by the senses are in passion and are temporary, so they're not considered to be real happiness, because happiness should be something that's consistent. Happiness and passion from sense enjoyment, it's always interspersed with suffering, like a roller coaster. It's like, it can be sometimes seen as a gap in between suffering, like a relief from suffering in a sense. So it's external happiness rather than deep happiness. So we get sidetracked when we fall under the influence of passion or ignorance, and thus we fall prey to our lower nature, which is not who we really are. So, but real happiness is not external, but internal. And the mode of goodness is about living a good and virtuous life by using the intelligence to control the mind and senses. And we'll come back to that. There's also another interesting part of this is also the concept of karma, which can also be found in the Bhagavad-gita. And there's quite a lot of interest these days in this concept of karma as well. So according to the laws of karma, every action has a reaction. And the choices that we make determine our subsequent happiness or suffering. So goodness is also connected with good karma. In other words, when you do good to others, you receive rewards. And that feeling from doing good is an indicator that we're already experiencing that good karma. Doing good means creating good karma and therefore feeling good. So that is very much a part of it. And that same concept is also taught in other, like the Abrahamic religions, like, for example, in the Bible, as you sow, so shall you reap, which is the same concept. And talking of religion, morality and virtue were traditionally taught together with religion. That was before there was this separation between science and religion, decline of religion, with science winning the battle and the secularization of the educational system. So then, without that sort of structure of religious teachings, the moral codes also became less structured. Because today, most educational institutions are science-based and they teach only material knowledge. So by demoting religion and spirituality, they have left a moral vacuum and a spiritual vacuum in education. But still, nevertheless, everyone has this inbuilt moral compass, which is known as conscience, that little voice inside the head, which tells us when we're doing something right or something wrong, by making us feel guilty when we do wrong and making us feel good when we do right. So everyone's got that. So where does this voice come from? Where does morality come from? Where does virtue come from? Apparently, we are pre-programmed with a moral software of virtues. Now, this doesn't really compute with Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest. Darwinism is still upheld throughout the educational system as a kind of substitute for religion. It's still being held up there because there hasn't really anything strong enough been found to supersede it. But actually, evolutionary biologists today, most of them are not really impressed anymore with Darwinism. But it's still there. But it doesn't explain human morals and virtues, and it doesn't explain love. It doesn't explain all these things that we're talking about. And morality and virtues, they're not studied by empirical science, because empirical science is limited to studying only material phenomena, the things that can be observed and measured by the human senses, by technology, just the physical world. Now, morals and virtues, they're not physical, and therefore they cannot be seen, but there's no doubt that they exist. Like most people believe it's wrong to kill innocent people, not just because it's what they've been taught, but they feel it inside. Therefore, you don't see people running around hurting people and killing people, except for a few really crazy people that do stuff like that. But most people, they believe instinctively that certain things are right and certain things are wrong. Now, if morals are real, but they're not physical, that means they must be metaphysical, which means that anyone who believes in morals believes in the metaphysical, something which exists beyond the physical world. And the same applies to virtue. People manifest kindness, gratitude, humility, love. These things cannot be seen or measured, but there's no doubt that they exist. Therefore, they are known as metaphysical. Some people manifest them more than others, but the same kind of moral code is there within everyone. Very, very similar. So, what is it? Virtues can be taught and can be learned and can be practiced consciously, but they're drawn from within. And that's why they can also be found to manifest spontaneously without being learned or practiced. Even young children can be seen to naturally manifest things which we would consider to be virtues, like empathy, kindness, generosity, and trust, faith, truthfulness. Children, they don't hold grudges against people. Their disagreements are quickly forgotten. They just like to play and pursue their imagination. And they have this natural innocence, which these different virtues can be seen bubbling up in them. So virtues and ethics are metaphysical. What does this mean? So meta is a Greek word which means transcending or overarching or fundamental. So it means that it's transcending or overarching the physical. It's something that's above, that's surrounding, but it's also beneath, fundamental. So if we accept, which is very hard to deny, that some things are metaphysical, that means we live in a bidimensional universe. So there are two dimensions or two layers of existence, and there are two fields of knowledge, otherwise known as matter and spirit. In Vedic teachings, knowledge is considered to be understanding the difference between matter and spirit. Empirical science acknowledges only one of these two dimensions, because the other one is beyond its purview of understanding, being invisible and subtle. But if we don't try to understand this, we are shutting out the essence of our being and the higher reality of existence. Like scientists talk about the problem of consciousness. Our consciousness is not a problem. Consciousness is, we are conscious beings. But for empirical scientists, consciousness is a problem because they can't figure out where it comes from. They can't figure out what it is. They can't see it. They can't measure it. They can't fathom it. Therefore, there's a need for a metaphysical science. So human virtues are referred to by many philosophers and religious and spiritual teachings as divine qualities of the soul. So we can find these kind of references in Kant. In the Bible, they're called the fruit of the spirit. In the Bhagavad-gita, we see the list of virtues, divine qualities. And Positive psychology also, in accordance with Aristotle, is based on the posit that the human being is pre-programmed with a moral software of justice, courage, fairness, and so on. And for the rationalist philosopher Descartes, virtue consists in the correct reasoning that should guide our actions. And he also said that virtue produces a spiritual pleasure that is better than bodily pleasure. So the spiritual vacuum in society that's been left by secularization is being filled up with other things nowadays, like positive psychology, for example, yoga, meditation, mindfulness, vegetarianism and veganism, which are connected with kindness and compassion. So, like, for example, yoga helps with mental and physical well-being and inner peace. Through meditation, people, they try to transcend the mind and find peace within. And there is mindfulness, which is a way of becoming more conscious of the self and the present, and becoming detached from the mind, the busyness of the mind and the emotions. So people are finding different ways to fill that spiritual void that's been left by the takeover of science. And all these things, they help to improve mental health in a world driven by materialism and sensual pleasure that focuses on the needs of the body and ignores the needs of the soul. And all these practices help people to develop their goodness, their self-awareness, and their happiness. People also find happiness by doing good deeds, doing charity work, social welfare, animal welfare, environmental conservation projects, etc. So all of these are helping people to survive in this mad world by becoming more peaceful, more centered and grounded. But the thing that's in short supply still these days is rational thinking. And many people are avoiding the bigger questions. You know, the big questions like, who am I? Where do I come from? Where does everything come from? What is my purpose? What happens after death? These are like, they're such big questions and such difficult questions that people just tend to ignore them and not think about them because they just can't figure it out and they don't know where to go to find answers. So the virtues, though, inherent within people could be seen as signposts which point to our divinity, which point to the existence of the soul, of something divine. And this could be said to also indicate the existence of a divine original source of goodness, because it has to come from somewhere. When it comes to material sciences, scientists, they observe the laws of cause and effect. They look for a cause behind the effect. According to our experience, observation, nothing comes from nothing. Everything comes from something, right? So this same kind of question, where does it come from, need to be asked about metaphysical phenomena, not just about physical things, but metaphysical things like goodness, virtue, beauty, love, metaphysical equality, which is the basis of democracy, and happiness. It's interesting that nowadays many scientists are coming to terms with the idea that there is a higher intelligence behind everything, because they can't find any other explanation for because, like, for example, in microbiology, the study of cells and the complexity and the order that they're finding, that they're observing, are just so mind-blowing that they can't find any way to explain it, except that there must be some higher intelligence ordering everything. So a lot of scientists are becoming more and more open to that, actually, because actually the separation between science and spirituality has been really harmful for the progress of spiritual knowledge. In the past, I mean, before they separated, they used to work together. Like, for example, in the time of the Renaissance, the Age of Enlightenment, you've got scientists like Newton, and they all studied, they were all religious, and all the greatest scientists of those days, they were also religious, and there was no contradiction for them between science and religion. And it's so unfortunate that those things became separated, and there's so much great progress been made in science, technological progress in medicine, in communications, in so many areas. But it's kind of like a body without a soul, because even though science is progressing so fast, but spirituality has just become lost, and people are trying to find it again in so many different ways now. So it's, if we look at it logically, if there's a higher intelligence governing the universe, which a lot of people acknowledge, so that would be the obvious place to look to trace back the source of everything. Just like if consciousness is a symptom of the soul within the body, this could be seen as a microcosm of a bigger reality, which is the super soul within the universe. The bigger soul that gives life to the universe. It's like there's so many indications like that. Like the soul is the living force of the body. So what is the living force of the universe? What gives life to the universe? What propels everything? So could it be that there's a master soul where all these divine qualities are coming from? If this is the case, it would appear to be a strong possibility that this supreme soul, or God, is a person. Because we are persons, and how can an impersonal energy produce personalities? So this has to be considered, because it's just logic. Like with virtues also, if they are divine qualities of the soul emanating from the source or the supreme soul, then God must be a person, because how can an impersonal energy display virtue or love? So if we feel love, if we have virtue, and that all has to come from somewhere, it must come from a person. Now, of course, a lot of people, they tend to reject religion nowadays because they see all these different religions, and they think that they all claim to present the truth, but they're all different. So where's the truth? So none of them have the truth. But actually, if the outward vestments of religions are removed, all the cultural differences, the geographical differences, the racial differences, and if we actually look at the source, go to the source of each religion, we will find that they're actually all coming from a very, very similar source. They're all coming from that same raw spiritual experience that people have had. The same realizations are there. And if we search through the teachings, we find that the same basic truths are there. The same basic knowledge is there. And the difference is they're all external and superficial. So that's like the difference between religion and spirituality, because spirituality is there in every religion. And so in another sense, religion and spirituality are the same when you look at the core of it. When people reject religion, what they're rejecting is the toxic institutions, the fanaticism, the sectarianism, and the dark history of religions. But in truth, religion, in its essence, is non-different from spirituality. So when people say, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious, yeah, that's okay, but we have to understand what that means. Because the spirituality, it's like something that we all have in common. And religion can appear in different forms, but it's just a way of, religious practices are just a way of awakening our spirituality. So it is the spirituality that is really important, the knowledge, which is of who we are and what is our purpose and what is our goal in life. So the goals and purposes should be also always converging between these different religions. And also there's the power of prayer, because that is something common also to all religions. And when people pray, people in every religion, people pray. And throughout the ages, people have prayed. And if we just say that all these people are deluded, they're just wasting their time, it's a bit of an insult to the huge majority of people that they should be considered to be deluded fools, and that they just carry on praying and imagining that there's someone reciprocating with them. It's not really an unbiased and open-minded way of looking at it. So this is like the testimony of the people, the silent majority, who actually, even today, believe in God. There are so many people who still believe in God and who still follow some kind of religion. So it's been very hard to stamp it out. And even if the religions are stamped out, then spirituality comes up anyway, because life without any religion, any spiritual belief is just, it's not really life, it's just a death sentence, really. And because if there's a God, he's not sectarian, he's not elitist, he's a perfect person, and he is the source of perfection, the source of love, and the source of all virtues. And it's not possible for souls who are fragments of the divine to possess anything that is not possessed by their source. It's just simple logic. And assuming this, if there is a supreme person who is the ultimate source of love, he must also be the ultimate object of love. So, in other words, the ultimate fulfillment of acts of goodness, service, and love is to repose them at the source. And this is the purpose of all religions. And according to ancient Vedic teachings, the most advanced and complete form of yoga is called Bhakti Yoga, which means engaging the mind and body in devotional service to the Supreme Person. And it's not so much a religion as a spiritual science. And it's interesting that for people who are engaged in Bhakti Yoga, the soul becomes cleansed. That's what it's said in the Vedic scriptures. And their inherent virtues are naturally manifested as a side benefit. There's one verse in the Bhagavata, the Bhagavad Purana, which says that all the good qualities of the demigods become manifested in one who is engaged in pure devotional service to the Supreme Lord. So we develop our virtue and our happiness by practice. But if we engage in Bhakti Yoga, virtues and happiness come to us automatically because we are reconnecting with the source of all virtue and happiness. And that is the spiritual science of Krishna consciousness. And according to Socrates, virtue is also knowledge. So we will end there and find out if there are any questions.
Thank you very, very much, Jagannathesvari. I have to say it was an extraordinary address. In such a short space of time, you touched on so many significant issues. A sort of a narrative that spanned the whole spectrum of the human condition. I really, really appreciated the points that you made. I did have some questions, but I'm going to open it up because I do have a personal contact address for you, so I can always ask my questions afterward. I'll give privilege to those who may not be as lucky. So if anyone has a question, just raise your hand, or you can put it in the chat and I'll read it out for you. But now's your chance. Any questions?
I have a question. I was going to put it into the chat, but I was hanging on to every word. That was incredible. Really, really enjoyed that. I recently graduated from studying psychology, but I still tell everyone I'm a student of psychology.
She really does.
I really do. I can't let go of it. And I guess, that's part of psychology. It's just, you see it everywhere. And I agree. I think that positive psychology really is gaining traction, and it will continue to. And I particularly loved how you linked how the findings in positive psychology relate to virtuous behaviors, and how I think you used the word signposts, how those virtues are signposts for human nature, understanding human nature, but also beyond human nature. Is there more to us than that? So yeah, absolutely loved that. My question was relating to one of the points you made about these modes of nature. And you mentioned that they're goodness, passion, and ignorance, and how pervasive they can be in our environment. So my question was, if somebody finds themselves in an environment that seems to be saturated by the mode of ignorance, which doesn't seem to be very conducive to exercising qualities of virtue, to what extent is somebody free to act in a virtuous way? Do these modes of nature hamper the freedom of expression in that way?
Well, we all have free will. God has given us all free will, freedom of choice, how to act. So, of course, one way is by studying, by practice of, by developing knowledge of these energies and how to balance them in our lives. But even if someone doesn't have knowledge, I think people can feel that if they're being dragged down into ignorance, it doesn't feel good. And so they can choose to have a life that is more progressive, that is more morally sound, that makes them feel better, and that is also endorsed by social morals. That's does that answer your question?
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Okay, I'll read one question that came through on the private chat. I understand from your talk that we are virtuous by nature. In that case, is it not painful to not be who we are? Why do we deny being who we are, and how do we conceal the pain if we are by nature virtuous?
That I think everyone has to examine their own heart on that one. That sounds like a very personal question. And I think we have to look within our own hearts. I mean, we all have the power. We've been given the power to make choices. And of course, there are a lot of obstacles on the way that may impede us in our choices. But if we have to decide what we really want in life, what we want to achieve in life, and then we can actually also work through those obstacles, work through the pain and suffering, because once we are practicing virtue and practicing spirituality, then we will achieve ultimate happiness. Okay.
Thank you very much. And I see Rupa Vilas Prabhu with his hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, I know that, for instance, humanism is very popular in contemporary society. There's a great stress on, the goodness of being human, humanism. And yet we see that the humanists are generally just concerned for the humans. They don't care about any of the other living beings on the earth or in the universe. They just talk about humans and humanism. And so it seems that you could argue that humanism springs from a virtuous source, but it seems that it's very limited in its dimensions. So I just wondered if you could address that point.
Humanism, I know it was quite popular in the sort of early part of the 20th century. I don't really hear that word being used so much now, but I would think that to be humanitarian, I mean, like humanitarianism, for example, means being compassionate to humans. But as you rightly point out, real compassion should extend to all living beings. And, for people who have an understanding that there's a soul within everybody, then their compassion can extend to all living beings. And I think it is becoming more and more popular these days, Buddhism, vegetarianism, veganism, and all these things. I think Even though a lot of people are doing it mainly to save the planet for themselves, maybe, but still, you know, kindness to animals, I think it is on the increase, fortunately. But we're still getting there.
Thank you very much. Another question by Jagat Palana Prabhu.
First, thank you very much. It was wonderful. It was very interesting. I was particularly interested in you bringing in the Greek philosophers. The Greek philosopher, you bring it in Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates, and I'm gonna and linking to, if I remember, probably use the expression of the need to develop a science of metaphysics. Did I hear you correctly?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. It's very interesting because basically Aristotle, he started the science of metaphysics. Actually, the word metaphysics, the word itself, was used first in history for the first time by a commentator of Aristotle, a scholar of Aristotle, I think it was 1st, 2nd century, who described a section of Aristotle books as the books on metaphysics. That's when the word comes up first in history. And in his books on metaphysics, Aristotle is precisely trying to do that. He's trying to develop a science of metaphysics.
Mm-hmm.
Because he not only is the first metaphysicians, or at least the first one who systematized the science of metaphysics, but he's also the first scientist. He's the first one who also systematized science, who created, you know, I think he created biology. And specifically, he considered metaphysics the first science, what came be known then in Latin as philosophia prima, means first philosophy.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing that he considered it a science and used the word episteme, which was then translated into Latin as science. The word science, the word itself science, is a Latin translation of the Greek word used by Aristotle, episteme. And episteme means scientific knowledge. Therefore, Aristotle in his books on metaphysics is trying to develop a science of metaphysics.
Mm-hmm.
And the main characteristic that science has, still now actually, and as conceived by Plato before, but Aristotle, we take Aristotle the first scientist because he wanted to systematize it, and he wrote extensively created the category of investigation source for. Is episteme? It means that is demonstrable. They call it necessary truth, but the main thing is that is demonstrable. It's scientifically because it's demonstrable, which is still currently the same. Contemporary scientists also hold the same opinion. The difference is that now, as you correctly pointed out, now science has become, they just concern themselves with the realm of empiricism. So the only demonstration that contemporary science accept is empirical evidence. But as you also correctly pointed out, is a very recent departure from the history of science. Aristotle, he established this, the way of establishing things, even metaphysical truth, scientifically, demonstrably, but crucially, their demonstration has to be demonstrated to reason, which is for him and Plato, that was a much better demonstration, accurate demonstration, than the present demonstration that is demonstrated empirically. Because they had themselves the understanding, like the Vedic sages have, that the senses cannot bring proper knowledge. But reason, the logos, what they call the logos, from which you get the word logic, which is also, you mentioned that God, the absolute truth, which they called it with the logos, is an intelligent being and is rational. Therefore, because it's that, and because we're part of that, we can understand things scientifically.
Yes, yes. Yes, thank you for that. It makes a lot of sense. And that's why the science of metaphysics needs to be revived.
That's right.
At the point, like then it was called a science, but now it's not anymore. Now it's considered to be hocus pocus, you know, so we need to actually re-establish a science of metaphysics, just like they
like
had.
Plato was trying to do.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Okay. Maybe I'll squeeze a couple of questions myself before we run out of time. I had a whole host of questions, but I'm just going to pick two that come to mind from the recent discussions. Number one thing that I've observed recently through talking to some fellow students is that one place that we demonstrate virtue is in a sense of humility in what we know. So there is a view that when we're talking about things beyond empirical science, as you pointed out, that so many people who seem to have equal epistemic capabilities, you know, they appear to be equally rational, they appear to be they have equal access to information, etc., come up with, as you mentioned, different perspectives on what these metaphysical truths are, whether it's an ethical truth or it's some sort of spiritual divine entity. They have just different perspectives. So what I'm trying to say is there seems to be a view that it is a symptom of virtue that you exercise doubt in relation to your knowledge or access to metaphysical things, because there are conflicting views in equally sincere people. And also there is a worry that you might be fooling yourself because you want to believe something. So there is a part of your virtue seems to be to doubt yourself. I wondered what you think about that understanding of virtue and whether that kind of virtue is contrary to the exercise of a metaphysical science. That was one question. And then very quickly, if I may, the second one is about right at the beginning, you made a really interesting point about virtue being, I think you mentioned, pre-programmed within us as beings. And I wondered how that fits with the idea that virtue is something over and above what might be expected of you, or something more than what you are obliged to do. And as I've heard virtue used before, virtue seems to be that extra thing. But if we're programmed with virtue, then it feels like it almost, what's the word? It deflates the specialness of doing something virtuous, because that's actually what you're supposed to be doing anyway. So it's not really virtuous to do that which is already programmed in your nature. And I wondered how you might, is that a misunderstanding of what programmed virtue is? And is there a better way that we might understand that? So those two questions, one about the nature of virtue as being programmed, and the other one that I mentioned earlier.
Okay. Well, regarding your first question about humility and self-doubt, there's a nice quote from C.S. Lewis about humility, that he says that humility is not really thinking less of yourself, but it's thinking of yourself less. So humility doesn't have to mean self-doubt. Because if we know who we really are, then if we actually realize who we are, then we are naturally humble, because we are tiny specks, but we are also, but it's also, it's the kind of humility but it's not like self-denigrating, because we know that we are part and parcel of Krishna, and therefore we are also amazing, and we are spirit souls, and therefore, you know, we are also pure in essence, you know, but because we're very small, therefore it's good to maintain humility, but it doesn't mean that we should doubt ourselves, because if we know something, if we know it from our heart to be true, if that, you know, if that's a real spiritual knowledge, then we can be convinced of that without thinking that we have come up with that, because, you know, the source of all our knowledge is Krishna anyway. He is the source of remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. So it's all coming from him anyway. So the more we accept that it's coming from Krishna, the more humble we are, the more knowledge we get. So that, you know, humility is actually the crown jewel of knowledge. That's about your first question. Your second question about being pre-programmed with virtues. We have that. I mean, when I use that term, moral software pre-programmed, it means that's all within us. But that's like as a potential, you know, we have that potential, but then it's up to us what we do with it. So we can exercise it or not exercise it, or we can just do what's expected of us socially, or we can go beyond that. And the more we go beyond that, the more we'll be happy, the more we'll feel fulfilled, that we're actually utilizing our God-given potential, and, you know, ultimately engaging it in Krishna's service would be the perfection of that.
Thank you very much for your response. I know we're at 1:15. Oh, sorry, I see Shaul Bihari. I'm going to give her a chance to ask that question.
Thank you. Very quickly. First of all, it was absolutely terrific, you speaking tonight. It was wonderful. Thank you very much. The quick question is, I noticed patience wasn't listed as one of the virtues. And I'm sure we've all grown up, I don't know about in the United States, but in England, we've all grown up being told patience is a virtue, patience is a virtue. Could you just throw any light on where that comes from?
Patience is a virtue. Yes, that's true. It's actually true. But it's connected with other virtues, I tend to think. Like, for example, hope. Hope is a more positive virtue. And if we have hope, if we maintain the positive virtue of hope, then the virtue of patience will automatically follow. Because if we've got hope for the future, then we have to be patient to await that to manifest, to await things to manifest.
But it was interesting that it wasn't on your list. I was just, it was a curious thing, because of course we are, at least we were brought up, you know, hearing again and again how you have to be patient. And to be virtuous, you have to be patient.
Yeah, it is very true, but it's also got a slightly negative connotation in the sense that, you know, you're in some negative situation where you have to exercise patience. So it's more positive to say hope, and then patience and tolerance, they come along with that. But patience and tolerance, of course, are very important in life.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you for mentioning that.
So I know we had requested you up until 8:15, and we've just gone past that. But before we close, I just can't resist but just ask one quick one. I hope it's a quick one, because it's a topic that...
Did I get to ask mine?
Oh, no. Okay, me and Rachel will just ask something quickly. But this one I'm asking on behalf of many, many friends that I have, because I know it's something that deeply concerns them. So very briefly, we talked, I think you mentioned the bidimensional nature of our existence, metaphysical things that we seem to be committed to. But there are many people nowadays who do seem to believe that we have evolved to value those things in some way. And there seems to be a naturalistic story that we might be able to tell that doesn't need to commit us to the risk of, or whereby we don't need to take the risk of committing ourselves to some spiritual reality when there's so many options on offer and we don't know, and they all seem to be very different. And we may not, our reasoning abilities or our whatever other resources we have to adjudicate between different options seems limited. So people feel a little hesitant to commit to something, whereas the scientific paradigm does seem to tell something like a story about how we might have evolved to appreciate certain values for our own well-being, for survival, and the survival of the species. I wondered do you feel that there's some inherent flaw maybe, or something missing in that sort of paradigm that should spur an impetus to try to find out whether there is something deeper and take that risk?
Yes, there's a lot missing, actually. And I mean, are you referring to like Darwinism, something like that?
I think many people would appeal to Darwinism and say that we have evolved as a species to have certain attitudes or behaviors that are conducive to our flourishing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, in Darwinism, there is a lot of truth. I mean, the scientific truth, we can see how species evolve. You know, that aspect of it, you can see species are evolving certain characteristics according to changes in their location, their habitat, like that, and that is real. But the problem with Darwinism is that it takes a kind of a leap from what is observed in nature. It then takes a leap to say that actually this explains where we come from, how we became what we are, you know, even just physically how we evolved. And you know, there is actually no solid proof of that. And you know, I don't claim to be a scientist, but I know that nowadays in the field of evolutionary biology, I mean, I've read some things, and I've seen some lectures and things like that from people in that field. And basically Darwinism has now become demoted because it hasn't been found to give all the answers. And even in evolutionary biology itself, it doesn't. There's been further progress made in that field. So, and that's just talking about biology. What to speak about the origins of life, which is, it's a much higher topic, and which, you know, requires, I would say, requires a lot more study and, you know, like, as we were saying, it's a metaphysical topic, really. So it can't be understood. There hasn't been any conclusive proof. Even though Darwinism was accepted, it was never conclusively proved, the theories. And there was always that missing link as well there, you know, which was never solved. How one species, even in the biology, how one species could evolve to become another species, that there was never any proof of that, even biologically. What to speak of, you know, making this claim that this is how we began, this is how the world began, which is way beyond the purview of that science, really.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'll let Rashma ask.
Does your time permit another question?
Okay.
One last one.
Last one. I'll be cheeky and just squeeze it in there. Towards the end of your talk, you touched on us all being individual beings. So I was wondering, because of that individuality, could it be that the expression of a virtuous behavior, could that differ from person to person, or is there more of an objective sense to these virtues?
Well, because we're all individuals, we all express ourselves differently. The basic virtues, I would say, remain the same, but they can be expressed in different ways, just like we have different flavors. Like in Bhakti Yoga, there's different flavors, different rasas of how to express our, you know, inherent virtues and how to engage them. So, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much. And we will now bring this session to a close. Thank you so much for that presentation. I think the fact that we all had so many questions is just a testament to how wonderful your presentation was. Very thought-provoking. Yes, it was wonderful. So thank you so much. And thank you to everyone. Thank you to everyone for attending. I see some familiar faces. Laura, I don't think we've had you at our events before, but you're more than welcome to join. You'll find out more on the Krishna London social media. So yes, I mean, thank you everyone. And of course, thank you to Jagannathesvari. It was wonderful.